Have you ever been using a Sharpie at work and then you lose track of time and you start hallucinating? Like you actually start getting high on the Sharpie? No? Well, I'm a lightweight. I've never really done anything drug related because, I'm a law abiding citizen. What can I say? But seriously, though, that happened to me the other day. Pretty embarrassing. I mean, I was high on a Sharpie. I was tripping over myself. I forgot who I was for a second. Anyways, all jokes aside, I actually wanted to talk about some of the newer Star Wars action figure reveals from the newest PulseCon event that Hasbro decided to have. I did a video where we talked about some of the Marvel Legends that were announced or anything Marvel related, but in today's video, I'm going to my baby. I'm going to Star Wars. I grew up a huge Star Wars fan, and even though I don't collect too much of the Star Wars vintage, I thought I would talk a little bit about it because I have been picking up figures here and there more consistently, and I am actually enjoying the line, surprisingly. Now, I thought we should start off with the Black Series line, and Hasbro has finally decided to release Commander Bara, and I actually wasn't there for the live stream, so I'm only basing myself off of the promotional images as well as the listings, but I'm going to guess that is the newer Clone Trooper body mold with the extra points of articulation and the soft shoulder pads. I believe that strap piece that is over the upper part of the torso is also brand new, but I could be wrong. This figure will also come with some cloth goods, which is really cool, not something that you expect from the Black Series too consistently. I will say the only downside, at least in my humble personal opinion, has to be how plain this figure is in terms of paint. I would have loved to see a wash. I would have loved to see some dirt, maybe some battle damage. If I remember correctly, at least going off of my tiny little reptilian memory, he wasn't like a clean-cut clone trooper. He definitely had battle damage to him. He was in the trenches. He did not have the whole white outfit that most clone troopers have. They're not battle proven, and so I would have loved just a little bit of a wash here and there. I guess you can go in there and do it yourself, but it would have been a nice touch. Regardless, this is not necessarily a fan favorite, but it's a cool addition to really continue fleshing out your clone trooper display. Speaking of fleshing out your display or your collection, you can now do that with your collection of droids because you can now add the Commando Droid to your display, which is a long-awaited army builder. If you guys have ever watched the Clone Wars or any of the prequel era stuff, you guys will be familiar with this Commando Droid. But if you guys have played any of the Battlefront video games or any of the newer ones, I can't recall if he's in Battlefront 1, but I know for a fact he's in Battlefront 2. You can actually play as a Commando Droid. I wouldn't be surprised if they later decide to release like a GameStop exclusive one that is based in the video game, but it's essentially the exact same version as the one that you may see in any of the Clone Wars animated episodes. Now, it is worth mentioning, this seems like it's a lot of reuse from that Super Battle Droid. The legs look like they're being reused as well as the arms. I believe maybe the only thing that isn't being reused is the head sculpt and then the torso. Again, I'm just going off of the promotional images. This may be some retooling here and there, but for the most part, it does seem to be reusing pieces from that Super Battle Droid, which I'm not too angry about. But I will say, just seeing the promotional images and the way that the figure is posed, it does seem a little bit awkward and a little bit weird, but a lot of the droids have had that same exact issue. I've had my gripes with, for example, the Droideka battle droid that had a bunch of issues in terms of the articulation scheme and the way that the figure was designed. The battle droid is also a perfect example of really poor engineer work, and I get it, they're battle droids. It's going to be very difficult to make them functional at a $25 price point, but thus far I have been pretty disappointed. But this is really exciting for those, like I said, that want to flesh out their droid display. So you can now pre-order this, and as of the moment of this recording, I believe it's still available at most of the big major retailers. Moving on to the much smaller but only in scale Star Wars vintage line, Hasbro did announce that they will be releasing an Anakin, but this will not be based on any of the Clone Wars animated stuff or even any of the epic prequel trilogy nonsense. We're actually going to be getting something based on the Ahsoka show. If for those people that are really interested, that actually enjoyed the live action Ahsoka show from Disney Plus, I don't count myself in that group, but you can now pick this up. It will be in that beautiful retro card that the Star Wars vintage line is known so well for. And just a rule of thumb for collecting action figures, make sure that you never judge an action figure for the source material. I know I've done that a couple of times where I just assumed it was going to be absolute garbage because maybe the show was, but then the action figure turned out to be just a phenomenal figure. The She-Hulk is a perfect example. Like, that Marvel Legends Hulk body mold for her was phenomenal, and the show was garbage. So sometimes you'll definitely find some hidden gems from Hasbro, and this could potentially be one of them. And actually, before we continue with the Star Wars vintage line, there are a couple of more Black Series action figures that were also announced. We did have the Prince Shizor, if I'm not mistaken. That could be the correct pronunciation. I have no idea. I've heard it like 3 different ways, but it's supposed to be something that isn't canon, so who cares, right? Like, Disney made it uncanon as soon as they acquired the whole Star Wars universe from George Lucas, but he has made a number of different appearances, if I'm not mistaken, in either comic book form or in one of those phenomenal novels from the Star Wars universe. He might have made a video game appearance as well way back in the day, but as I said, it's no longer canon. Who cares? This appears to be mostly brand new sculpting, at least from what I can tell. Maybe the legs, maybe some reuse because you can get away with it if you were Hasbro, but everything else seems to be brand new for this particular figure. I will say it's a really obscure one to go with, especially from Hasbro, and for the Black Series line, which is already obscure. It doesn't sell really well on shelves, and now you're going to throw in a really obscure characters from the Shadows of the Empire storyline. It's a little bit questionable, but it's really cool. They're doing really deep cuts for people that have been following the Star Wars universe from the Black Series and have wanted something new and unique. This is definitely a great opportunity, and this is one of those few figures from this particular wave that has not sold out as of the moment of this recording. It's so widely available if you guys are looking to pre-order him. Hasbro decided to also release the Black Series armor helmet. In all of their infinite wisdom, this is the helmet that they went with. I'll be brutally honest with you guys, it looks cool. I think it's a beautiful display piece, but I just don't know how much of a following the armor has. I don't know if there are that many people out there clamoring for this. I feel like it's definitely very obscure. I mean, there are some casual fans that are not even watching any of the Disney Plus live action shows, and so I feel like this kind of hits the mark. Not to say that it's a bad helmet, it looks phenomenal. Everything from Black Series in terms of like props, you know, they always do a phenomenal job. They always go above and beyond in terms of detail, but this is one of those that I probably would have chosen another character to go with. This has the potential to eventually go on sale or on clearance, but if you guys are interested, it is now available for $99.99, and it is worth mentioning the sculpt on this looks phenomenal. There's a lot of detail. The molding looks really well crafted. There's a lot of like battle damage. It's going to be an absolutely phenomenal display piece for sure. They also threw up a new pre-order for a Luke Skywalker as well as a Leia from the original trilogy, and I believe this is based on New Hope. Now correct me if I'm wrong, but the body molds are new, or at least they're being reused from other figures, but I really like them. I'm not a huge fan of Hasbro doing the soft cloth goods, and not because I don't like soft clothing in general on action figures, but I just don't like it from Hasbro. It's usually very flimsy. It's very cheap and thin. I would like to see them kind of like pin down some of their cloth goods. Like maybe if it is a robe, maybe pin it down around the waist and around the arms, not to limit articulation, but just to have the cloth sit a little bit more naturally instead of it just being like a giant cheap bathrobe, which is usually what we get, maybe a wired hood in some cases. But regardless, there's no need to worry about this because the head sculpts look phenomenal, and I actually like these body molds. I will say these figures do have the potential of going on clearance just because people don't really pick up the original trilogy stuff the way that they used to back in the day, but maybe because they are brand new, people will jump in on these. The accessory, the blaster for Leia, is really cool too. If you guys are interested in it, we probably already have like 100 of those blasters if you've been collecting the Black Series for any period of time, but still really cool. We're obviously just missing a Han action figure from A New Hope, so hopefully we get that soon. I think at the moment in my display for the original trilogy, I think I have their appearances from episode number 5. I think it's like the Bespin outfits. I could be wrong, but that's what I remember having on my display. I will say I'm a little bit angry at Hasbro with this particular line because for some unknown reason, Marvel Legends, G.I. Joe, they all get the modern day articulation applied to those figures or to those lines. But Hasbro never does it to their Black Series line. We're still getting single jointed knees in some cases, single jointed elbows, no butterfly joints. What's going on here, Hasbro? I definitely want the modern articulation, especially when it comes down to posing. I don't want my Luke Skywalker to just be upright holding a lightsaber. Like, I want him in a legitimate action pose. I want him to get crazy. I want him in running poses. And unfortunately, almost every Luke or every Leia that I pick up, I can usually just stand them up in like 2 to 3 poses. It's boring. I want something more from Hasbro, and I think it's time that they apply some of that modern technology to their Black Series line. I'm not sure why it is. Maybe they pay a little bit more in licensing fees to Disney for using the whole Star Wars universe, but I just feel like it's time for sure. I mean, just throw some butterfly joints in there, maybe some double jointed elbows, things of that nature, especially for some of these characters that are very thin. The butterfly joints, or I should say, well, the butterfly joints as well, but the double jointed elbows and knees could easily be ported on there. I mean, I get some of them are like have some really weird uniforms and clothing that is supposed to be, you know, based on the source material. But, you know, most of them could easily have double jointed knees, or it could really benefit from it anyways. For the Star Wars Vintage line, we are also supposed to be receiving a Clone Trooper Lieutenant from the Ahsoka live action show. Again, I was only like 2 to 3 episodes into the series before I stopped watching it, so I can't quite pinpoint what episode this particular trooper is from, but I think we've seen this body mold before. Correct me if I'm wrong. It might just be like a reuse from the Clone Wars series, and then I think they did one for the 2D animated Clone Wars series, like the Walmart exclusive series that they had not too long ago from Hasbro. But it's yet another one of those really cool army builders that all Star Wars Vintage fans are going to really appreciate from Hasbro. In the Star Wars Vintage line, we are also getting a Jedi Master in Bara. And look, honestly, if you were able to watch the entire series of The Acolyte on Disney Plus, you deserve a round of applause, a high five. I bow to you, Sensei, because you are an absolute master of the fandom. Because honestly, I watched the first episode and it just felt cheap. It felt rushed, and I really wasn't too interested in watching it. But as I always say, the source material doesn't always tell everything, and this figure looks really well done. I love the cloth goods on the Star Wars Vintage line a little bit more than the Black Series, but still, I wish they would pin it up a little bit more, clean it up. But this figure does seem to display really well with that cloth robe on her. And I like the leg articulation. I recently ran into a Star Wars Vintage Ahsoka action figure where the leg articulation is just a swivel that goes back and forth or forward and backward. It doesn't extend to the sides. I would much rather have a ball joint that attaches to the torso from the leg, similar to how this particular figure is configured. But thank goodness you don't run into this particular issue with this figure. And it was only fitting, since we got a new Luke Skywalker from episode 4 in Black Series form, that we would get one for the Star Wars Vintage line, and that's exactly what we're getting here. And don't worry, by the way, sometimes a lot of people are, shy away from the Star Wars Vintage line, maybe because they're a smaller scale and they just assume the articulation or the details aren't as good as like the Black Series line. But let me be brutally honest here, sometimes the articulation is either as good or better than the Black Series line. Don't ask me why, that's just the way that things are. This figure looks absolutely phenomenal. The only real issue that I have here is that head sculpt. It looks a little bit weird. The dude looks like he's fasting. I'm going to try to rewatch the entire New Hope film just to see if there's a scene where he looks like this. I don't know. I'm just not feeling the head sculpt, but the figure as a whole looks phenomenal. Comes with the lightsaber and then one powered down saber for your more chill displays or poses. And then finally, to wrap up today's video, because I have wasted an insane amount of saliva here, my mouth is dry. I may just be dehydrated, But I wanted to talk a little bit about this Mos Eisley playset for the Star Wars vintage line. It will include a Jawa. Now, again, not really too familiar with the Star Wars vintage line, so I don't know if this Jawa is like specific to, or if it's like an exclusive to this playset. I'm going to assume that probably it isn't, but it does come in a beautiful retro card, which is something cool. Usually when they include action figures, or I wouldn't say usually, but a lot of lines, when they include stuff into playsets, that you don't usually include them in like actual packaging. They'll usually just like throw them in there in some like plastic wrappings. So it's nice to get it in that retro card in case you already have maybe some Jawas. You don't have to open this one up and you can like keep it mint on card. Now, from what I could see, this is mostly going to be like really good sculpt work. You can see the texturing of what would be like some really bad concrete laying maybe, but I really couldn't see if there was that much paint applied to it. Hopefully this is just a byproduct of the promotional image, but this honestly looks like just a beautiful backdrop display piece for any Star Wars collector. Not to mention, Jawa does come with 3 blasters total, which is a pretty good amount of accessories for a figure that is essentially being thrown into a display piece. This will run you $59.99, which again really isn't that bad of a price point considering how much you're getting here. So there you guys have it. I've rambled on about almost every single figure that was announced at the newest Hasbro PulseCon event, at least regarding Star Wars. I did one for Marvel Legends. If you guys are interested in watching that video, I'll link it in the video or in the description somewhere. I have been falling incredibly behind when it comes down to the DC multiverse, so I'll probably will circle back around, talk about some good DC stuff being released. As always, if you enjoy this type of content, this type of rambling, make sure to stay tuned. We do this pretty often, but most importantly, make sure to enjoy the hobby. We sometimes forget to do that because of rambling and complaining and, you know, life, but just enjoy the figures, pose them around, play with them, enjoy the hobby. Stay safe out there. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.